Hey everyone, so welcome back. I wanted to upload another video to serve as kind of a supplemental video to our first discussion forum, which really starts to examine in a little bit more depth what a myth is, how do we define myths, and more importantly, what are the functions of myths, both historically and even in our contemporary culture today. It's been really fun getting to know all of you, or starting to get to know all of you on our discussion forum and our introductions. So if you haven't already posted, please make sure that you do introduce yourself. You can find that under the discussions tab on Canvas. We've already sort of started a little forum there introducing ourselves to each other. And then underneath that, you will see our first more formal discussion forum, which is called What is Myth? If you click on the modules tab for that first week, What is Myth? You will see the readings that are required, and also you will see in the discussions forum discussion questions that I have posted to start to move our conversation forward in relation to this set of first readings that we're going to be doing. Okay, so number one, introduce yourself under the discussions forum. Number two, take a look at your syllabus, see what readings you're supposed to be doing for the rest of this week. And then you can take a look under the discussion forum to see the actual discussion questions that you are going to be engaging. You should also have watched my syllabus review video, which is also posted under modules, so that you have a general sense of how the course is going to be conducted online. Just to review briefly, starting tomorrow, which is Thursday, we are going to be kind of like launching our first real formal forum discussion on those first set of readings. That will run from 9 a.m. tomorrow through 9 p.m. on Sunday. So you will have all of that time to do the readings and then to participate appropriately in our discussion forum. What that entails, you should review the syllabus where I talk about the actual discussion forum that we're going to be holding and what is required of you. You do not have to answer all of the discussion questions that I've posted. You can choose one to answer. You can choose two to answer if you want. Your goal is to choose a question or two and respond in about 200 to 300 words, so a little bit more of a focused, hearty response to those particular questions. You want to draw from the text so that you can cite to help support your point of view. And then in addition to that, you're going to respond in a shorter post, 100, 200 words, to one of your fellow classmates. Okay, you can ask a question of your classmate. You can respond to something specific that your classmate said if you had a different reading or interpretation than one of your classmates. It's always good to get different perspectives and different points of view. This is how we actually have a lively discussion, even though it isn't quite as organic as it would be in a classroom. This is how we actually develop a more critical analyses of the text that we're going to be reading, is to really expose ourselves to different points of view and also work on developing our points of view and utilizing the text to help you showcase your ideas clearly. Okay? So that is what is going to be happening for the rest of the week, Thursday to Sunday. Again, we're going to be starting our first formal discussion post. So what I want to do now is to just review in a little bit more detail what is a myth and in what ways do myths enable us to structure our lives, to make sense of our lives, and also to give meaning and value to our lives, even in contemporary culture. You don't have to look too far to see how certain myths and certain cultural adaptations of myths still pervade our culture. If you look at cinema, for example, you have a ton of movies and stories and narratives that draw specifically from myths. You have, first of all, the movie Troy. Hello, Brad Pitt and Eric Bana. You have Harry Potter. You have Percy Jackson. There are a ton of, you have Thor, Chris Hemsworth, heyo, right? You have Thor. You have all of these big blockbuster movies, these adventure tales with particular heroes who we root for and cheer for, and many of them either very directly draw from myths, or indirectly draw from mythology. So underneath your first modules tab, you will see a document that is entitled What is Myth? And it looks like this. I'll show it to you. Don't mind my notes. Okay. I'm going to just sort of talk through this. Some of these points sort of overlap with one another. So I might talk about them in concert with one another, but I do want to just sort of outline a couple of things, and they sort of highlight some of the main points that our scholars talk about in their introductions. We're reading the introduction by Donna Rosenberg, who is the editor of our World Mythology anthology. We're going to be reading a piece by Karen Armstrong, and we're also going to be reading some introductory notes from Thury and Davini, who are the editors of the other anthology. I have PDFs of all of this under modules just to get you started as you work to attain the text that you need. Okay, so again, myth comes from the Greek word muthos, which means story. This is appropriate. The heart of mythology is that they are narratives. They are stories. They are stories that we have told since essentially the dawn of time in order to do a couple of things. So let's outline those couple of things. Firstly, myths are typically not intended to be a recording of history, although some of them are. The Iliad, for example, by Homer, is a sort of historical accounting of the Trojan War. And all of the heroes and all of the actions and triumphs and heartaches of that particular time period. So sometimes myths can be utilized to sort of represent and instruct a sort of time in history, but oftentimes they're not necessarily about recording history. They're more about recording the culture of a people, and particularly their beliefs and their value systems. That tends to be sort of what we see in various cultures. The sort of root of the stories that are being told are to capture the essence of a people, their traditions, their values, their belief systems. Something else that myths have been historically used for is to provide some kind of instruction on how to behave successfully in a community. Humans are social beings. We live in communities, and so myths often are. Did you hear Alexa? She was talking. She's digging the lecture. Myths tend to be a way in which a society would function optimally by dictating sort of the moral roots of that society. What behaviors are considered good? What behaviors are considered bad? We see a lot in traditional myths that there are that they are structured around that sort of binary. We'll see it really, really clearly when we look at fairy tales in particular, which has all of them have a really stark binary in place: good versus evil, light versus darkness. This tends to be something kind of at the essence of mythology in order to instruct people on how to behave and to sort of encourage the types of behaviors and the dispositions that would enable a community to thrive as opposed to collapse. So that is another function of myths that we can still see having a use value today in our society. We tend to root for the good guys, right? We tend to to laud heroes for their good deeds and their intellect and their strength and their leadership skills or qualities. And so this is something that continues to be present in modern culture as much as it was in ancient cultures. Okay. Myth also has been used to explain the inexplicable, right? Is used to explain or give some kind of narrative structure to phenomena that as humans we don't always or haven't historically had answers for, right? Why is the sky blue? How did we come into existence, right? We know now, we have science now that can sort of show us through evolution how that happened, but often in different cultures, people needed a story and how to understand their own existence and how they came into being. And we actually will move next week into the creation myths of various different cultures and look at these stories and how we sort of came into being. So myth also functions to define, describe, provide some kind of tangible narrative to things that are beyond the sort of human experience. So how we came into existence, where are we going as a people, what happens to us after death, things that are challenging for humans to comprehend and to be at peace with. Armstrong says that we're meaning-seeking creatures, and we despair very easily at our own mortality, at our own fragility, and so it helps us. It provides comfort to us to have stories that we can tell ourselves and tell our children and pass down from generation to generation and culture to culture in order to help provide a source of organization and comfort to those things that are beyond our comprehension or that test the boundaries of humanity in some capacity. Mythology also tends to, though it's, it usually includes a sort of exciting pantheon of gods and goddesses, various deities with supreme powers and capabilities. Oftentimes, even the gods demonstrate really human qualities and characteristics. For example, many of the gods and goddesses experience love, they experience pain, they experience jealousy, they experience rage. We'll see this really clearly when we get to Bacchae, and we're dealing with Dionysus in Euripides' play, where we have a god who is angry and feels scorned and insulted, and sort of the superhuman things that he can do to exercise those feelings. But the feelings themselves are actually quite human, and they actually showcase the sort of ways in which humans experience life, right? We don't experience life just like happy every day. We are flawed creatures, and we see even the gods of having flaws or having weaknesses and experiencing emotions that are not always even keel or positive. And so a lot of mythology actually is about and is grounded in the human experience. And in turn, this allows us to live a little bit more presently in our own lives and provide some kind of structure and meaning for our own lives. Let's see. Today, myths can simply be something that is untrue. We have myths and stories that we tell that aren't true, but serve a kind of purpose to either, again, provide comfort or instruct us on how we should behave. I mean, fairy tales are a beautiful example of this, particularly in relation to children who don't have the same kind of moral compass that adults do or should have. They are instructions. Are they real? Are they true? No, but they serve that particular function of instructing on how to behave again in a society. And let's not forget that myths are entertaining, right? I mean, it's not a surprise that many myths have been adapted for the cinema or expanded into novels. I'm reading a novel right now called The Song of Achilles, and it's, it's a novel about Achilles' relationship with Patroclus and his journey to the Trojan War in finding fame and glory and all of the humanizing qualities of Achilles, his insecurities, his love for Patroclus in this particular text. So there are tons of poetic adaptations for the stage, again, cinema, because they are entertaining. We also want a form of escape from our own lives. As much as mythology is grounding in the human experience, we also want to be entertained. We want to escape the doldrums of our lives sometimes and imagine ourselves a god or a goddess or a hero on a quest, right, to achieve something unimaginable, right? So there is an inherent entertainment value to myths as well, and that keeps them in circulation, and it keeps them having a particular use value even in modern culture. Something else that I want to just highlight is that many of these myths, many myths in general, have or are a part of a long-standing oral tradition. Many myths were not directly inscribed in writing. Myths were often told and passed down orally from generation to generation within cultures. This is why we have some variances among different cultures. Because all mythology is about the human experience, you'll see that there are a lot of myths that are similar in nature. We'll really see this when we look at our creation and destruction myths. There are a lot of similarities between these myths, but they all sort of adapt and reflect their own particular culture and what that culture had in abundance and what that culture valued. So there's some variance in that, and but they are all sort of rooted again in that human experience, and they've been passed down between cultures through language, through oral language. And so it's hard sometimes to really identify certain myths as having one specific author. There are times when we do know or give credit to certain authors of myths. Homer, again, is another example of that. But even Homer, I mean, there is a lot of speculation that, Homer wasn't the sole author of the Odyssey. He was older when he wrote that. Or the Bible. I mean, the Bible is a true amalgamation of many authors over a long period of time. And so that's something to keep in mind too. We will see a sort of oral tradition at play in a lot of these myths. We'll see stylistic elements in a lot of these myths that sort of reflect that oral tradition. We'll see, for example, a lot of repetition of names, repetition of lines. Why? Because oftentimes these stories were being told and performed. There were rhapsodies who were essentially poets who used to actually perform these tales, oftentimes on a stage or in a crowd, for entertainment, to teach certain lessons, sometimes to teach certain historical events or moments that were important to a particular culture and important to a specific historical period. And so we will see certain elements of the oral tradition. We'll see it really clearly when we get to Native American myths, but we'll see certain elements of the oral tradition kind of echoing throughout this semester, and we'll sort of pay attention to them and use them as a way to help us sort of enter the text and unpack it from a more critical perspective. If I just sort of summarize the purpose of myth really, really generally, I would say that myths are often concerned with two questions. Where have we been, and where are we going? And so if we can kind of keep those two questions in mind as you sort of read through the text for this particular week, I think it'll be helpful for us and will sort of help guide our critical analyses of some of these texts. Okay, I think that's all I want to say for now. I'm going to sign off. If you have any questions about the course structure or about our first set of readings, you can always be in touch. Better yet, post on our discussion forum, so that other people can chime in, and we can really get a good first critical conversation going. Okay, so let's dive in. Looking forward to this upcoming conversation. Okay, signing off. Bye.